I would like to tell you about the project that I'm currently working on. I've been working on it for the past 10 years. And it started actually as an accident because I was writing my dissertation and I wanted to study the Jewish popular culture in the Soviet Union during the Stalinist period, so in the 20s and 30s. And I knew of this archive in New York called YIVA, Institute of Jewish Research, where I wanted to go and find lots of documents on the subject. And I even got the fellowship to go there. I was very excited to go to New York for a field work, only to arrive and realize they closed for renovations. I had no materials left. And, but I had something to do in New York for 6 months. And I just walked around in a Russian neighborhood in New York called Brighton Beach, south Brooklyn. And I realized that I haven't heard English there at all. It's just Russian or Yiddish. So I started thinking, who are these people who live there? And realized that essentially, these were the people who could tell me about Russian Jewish popular culture in the 30s and 40s, because these are my clients. These are the people who are authors or are subjects of those documents that I was hoping to read in the archive. And that's how I started my oral history project, which now grew to about 500 people who I interviewed, people who were born in the former Soviet Union, Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus between 1900 to 1929. First, I recorded, I studied popular culture, so I recorded their songs, I recorded their memories of 20s and 30s, and I was especially interested in music, and I recorded lots of Yiddish songs about subjects that nobody talked about, such as, I don't know, Yiddish songs about Stalin. For example, some ladies in Brooklyn would sing me those songs, and Stalin is our future, Stalin is our star, and we all love Stalin, and they would sing it in Yiddish, and I knew exactly they did not learn it anywhere else but in their childhood. But what was interesting to me is not only that, the fact that they remembered those songs, but also those songs taught them to think about other things in life. For example, I interviewed this lady in Brooklyn who spent a long time singing those Soviet Yiddish songs, and then she said to me, and then we moved to another subject, and then we talked about her life in New York, and she says, you know, I really love Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is such a wonderful leader. He helped us to get here. I absolutely adore him. I even wrote a song about him. And she sings me this song, and that song, she just replaced the Clinton of Stalin, and that's made a whole big thing of that. So, you know, the impact of all these things was far larger than just indoctrination. It really taught people to understand the world this way. So I wrote about this and about similar stories in my book called Soviet and Kosher, which came out a few years ago from Indiana University Press. And when I was working on that book, I thought, well, there are so many things that those people told me, and I only used maybe 5% of their stories in my book. So I decided to actually read those interviews for more than stories of popular culture, and realized that, well, they tell me things that I cannot find in textbooks and in relevant scholarly literature. And that's how my next project, something that I'm working on right now, was born, and that is studying what happened with Soviet Jews during the war. It seems that there's no more subject in Jewish history that's been studied more essentially than Holocaust. We all know what happened with European Jews, and a lot of memoirs have been written, lots of scholars wrote about that. But it's actually amazing that we don't know that what happened with the Jews who did not die in the Holocaust. The Russian Empire had 13 million Jews. On the eve of World War II, there were 6 million Jews living in the Soviet Union, 3 million with all the annexed territories and all this. To make the numbers a little bit shorter, of the 3 million Jews who lived in the Soviet Union by 1939, 1.5 survived the war away from battles, away from ghettos, away from concentration camps. These people were actually evacuated by the Soviet government to Siberia, to Central Asia, where they lived in horrible conditions, and some say that it was even worse than Gulag, than Soviet camps. But nevertheless, they survived the war. And when you dig a little bit deep in that, it turns out, well, they were not really evacuated by the Soviet government. They often made the decision to leave by themselves, and making this decision is quite an amazing thing if you think that in 1939 the Soviet government did not allow its citizens access to any press or any sort of information from outside of the Soviet Union. So how did they know what Germans did to the Jews in Poland? How did they know to leave? So these are the questions that I was asking people who I interviewed. What happened with you? Why did you decide to go? And a lot of interesting things came up. One of them was that a lot of people who told me they wanted to leave their place of residence once they heard the war started was not because they were afraid of the German army, but they wanted to leave because they were afraid of the locals who they believed would become anti-Semitic the moment when the Soviet power was gone. And it's amazing how quickly this transition took place. This one woman who I interviewed here in Toronto told me a story about how she and her mother and her little brother escaped, barely escaped the mass destruction of Russian Jews in their little village. She says that the moment they heard about the war, her father, who was not Jewish, and her mother, who was Jewish, and took their kids, her and her little brother, started walking through the forest with them. And they walk in this forest, and they meet the old man who is dressed as a Russian peasant and with a big knife, with a sickle. And the man tells them, "Where are you guys going?" And they say, "Oh, we're going to the railway station." And he looks at the woman's mother, and he says, "What ethnicity are you?" So the husband immediately says, "She's Greek." And he says, "Oh, okay, because I'm looking for Jews and I'm going to kill them if I find them." So what's interesting about this, right, is that he was not ashamed to say what he was doing. And the father, the husband of the woman, immediately knew what to answer to that question. You did not even think of saying she was Jewish. But this was not even the most dramatic part of the escape. And then they kept walking. And the father got tired. He had some injuries from the previous war, and his leg was hurting, his lung was not working. So he sat down and he said, "I'm not going to go anywhere." And the wife tells him, "But we will all die." He says, "Well, I'm not Jewish, I will not die." And she says, "Well, what about me and the children?" He says, "Well, I can't walk, I can't do it anymore." And then she asked the children, this woman who interviewed the daughter and her brother, to beg the father to stand on their knees and to beg him to go with them, because she understood, the mother, that if he doesn't walk with them, they will never reach that railway station. And that's what happened, and that's how she survived. The father reluctantly moved to the railway station. That's it. So stories like this, they're not only interesting in terms of what we learn, what the dilemmas people faced, but also how accidental it was that so many of them survived. I was talking to veterans of World War II, people who were actually fighting in the Soviet army during the war. And the question of the war always came up. And in the United States, most of my respondents, for example, say that, we fought the war because we were Jewish and we wanted to defend the Soviet motherland and Stalin and all that, but it was also because we were Jewish and we wanted to fight against the Nazis. People who live in Canada say, yes, we wanted to fight the war, and the Soviet Union was the most important country that fought the war, and Canadians were really not participating, so we should be the proper veterans of the war. And we defeated the Nazis. But people who live in Germany today, they actually don't say that the war was against Germany. They don't say that the war was against Nazi, and they never ever emphasize that they were Jewish fighting this war. They say, well, we were fighting in the war because we were ordered to do so by the commanders. Germans were doing the same thing. We were never brought up to be nationalists. We were always internationalists. So we were fighting in this war, but essentially the two evils were fighting each other. this discourse is nothing they heard in the Soviet Union. This is something that they do to survive, living in a society which we were fighting against. In fact, they even go and meet the veterans, the German veterans of the same war, and talk about the same experiences. So you realize that they were fighting against each other. They were shooting each other, following the orders. They were injured sometimes at the same places, and the mind-boggling fact, they could be injured by each other. I don't know, it's Stalingrad battle, right? But they go and meet, and they talk, and they feel that they share something in common. The survival techniques in Germany and the United States and Canada, they are different, but the desire to integrate is all the same.